In June 2012, Star Stable Online became available to play worldwide. I was 13 at the time, and as a lover of horses, an avid gamer, and most importantly, as a girl, I was the definition of Star Stable's target audience. You see, I was what you'd call a horse girl, and I'm sure many of you watching have been called that term at least once in your life. It's a term full of negative connotation, portraying girls as unstable, irrational, obsessive. For years, books, movies, TV shows, and games have all reinforced the stereotype. And in 2012, that was fine. We're called horse girls for a reason, right? It makes sense that games like Star Stable market themselves for the horse-loving young girl demographic, but it's not 2012 anymore.
They said making a game for girls was a mad idea. We said being a girl in a male-dominated world, that's a mad idea.
Star Stable Online's story is about a girl and her adventures in Jorvik, the sisterhood she is in, and her relationship with her horse. We decided to create a game with a female protagonist back in 2011, and this is the character our players will be when they play. Just like other games only have male main characters. Star Stable likes to champion themselves as a game for girls born at a time when games for girls were few and far between. And in truth, this was and is still the case for the broader gaming industry. It is an overwhelmingly male-dominated field. But that isn't to say there hasn't been any progress. Games like Subnautica Below Zero, Tomb Raider, Horizon Zero Dawn, and many, many more proudly showcase female protagonists. But something important to note about these games is that they're narrative single-player games, which Star Stable isn't. Star Stable is an MMO RPG, or a massive multiplayer online role-playing game. Popular MMOs include World of Warcraft, City of Heroes, Rest in Pieces, my darling, EVE Online, or RuneScape. And the idea of this genre is in the name. Online role-playing, where players create avatars to either reflect themselves or who they wish to be in the game. The concept of forcing players to play as certain genders in MMOs is a controversial topic called gender locking. Games like Terra, Lost Ark, or Black Desert Online all have gender locking, but the biggest difference between them and Star Stable is that they only gender lock for certain classes, not the entire game. Think of it like this. Maybe you like to play as a paladin when you're playing D&D with your friends, but you log on to a certain MMO and paladins are restricted to only play as a male. The reason that gender locking is so controversial among players is that it limits player freedom and forces players into a box that they don't necessarily want to be in. Again, MMO players want to see themselves or who they wish to be reflected in the games that they play. We make sure to have a variety of clothes, decorations, and hairstyles to give players a chance to customize their character to look more like themselves or who they wish to be. While some games use their lore to justify gender locking, most players find this argument flimsy at best. After all, lore is fantasy, and it can always be altered to better serve the needs of players. And it's lore that Star Stable uses as their first and foremost argument against the addition of male avatars. The team argues that players, regardless of who they are, roleplay as a girl when they log into Star Stable. They say that this is okay because other games ask you to assume various roles when playing them. They're treating the game as if it's primarily single player with multiplayer functionality. Yet Star Stable's entire questing system functions no different than that of any other MMO. So one could then make the same argument for World of Warcraft, that being multiplayer comes second to the single player quest lines. I've also had conversations with folks that then compare it to Genshin Impact. Well, in Genshin, you play as certain characters because of the game's lore. It's no different than in Star Stable. But it is. I mean, for one, Genshin isn't even an MMO. It's an online role-playing game with multiplayer that is not as expansive as your traditional MMO. And even if it were an MMO, the gacha mechanics of the game make it to where everyone's playing with the same characters in various different skins. There's no actual character creation involved. So while everything Star Stable is doing is atypical of the MMO genre, it is not, however, atypical of the equestrian genre. Star Stable, at its heart, is a horse game. And horse games, as we've established, have a very specific target audience: horse girls. From Barbie Horse Adventure to Bella Sarah to The Legacy of Rosamund Hill, most horse games feature female protagonists. Congratulations, Star Stable! You made a horse game for girls. Really breaking the glass ceiling out here. But seriously, y'all could have made any game for girls you wanted, yet you chose a horse game? A leading female protagonist wasn't and isn't revolutionary for the genre. It isn't empowering. It's fill-in-the-blank, horse girl forms bond with other horse girls and her horse. And while it might make efforts to reclaim the term horse girl for its players, the exclusion of male avatars just reaffirms that horses are a girl thing, and that boys aren't welcome in the space. And this is an idea reflected in the messages male players receive on a daily basis. I have no idea where to start with this. Let me start by first saying, I'm 24 years old playing the game, and I know plenty of 30-year-olds who play it too. So while it might be a child-friendly game, it is not a child-exclusive game, and it never has been. It's like saying that you can't go see the new Puss in Boots movie with your 5-year-old nephew because you're not 5 years old. Secondly, to say it's okay for gay or trans folks to play a game, but not straight men, is homophobic. You are attributing a man's gayness to femininity, or stating that a trans man is not a real man, and that there's an underlying feminine quality to them. What the f*** Star Stable? While Star Stable is not making these comments themselves, their exclusion of male avatars has created an environment where some people think that kind of behavior is acceptable. Star Stable's silence, like that of a bystander, is enabling. And so Star Stable has created this weird, ultra-feminist environment that's honestly reminiscent of TERF ideology, aka J.K. Rowling. As a game with extremely young players, it is partially Star Stable's responsibility to help educate said players. While on paper these sorts of comments aren't acceptable, their long neglect of the issue says otherwise. And so Star Stable cannot claim to be inclusive when they themselves are helping foster this environment where male players are receiving harassment on a daily basis. I will say though, this particular comment brings up an issue that I've been wondering myself for a rather long time now. While Star Stable hasn't explicitly stated that player safety is a contributing factor to the exclusion of male avatars, I definitely think it's something that's crossed their minds, especially when considering my own experiences online. So back before I found Star Stable, there was one other MMO that had child me in a vice grip. Pixie Hollow was very similar to Star Stable in that it captured a very similar demographic, young girls for the most part, as well as it had a very similar business model. So you could play for free, or you could pay for a monthly subscription to Pixie Hollow, or you could essentially have a lifetime rider account. There was another similarity between the two games in that at Pixie Hollow's launch, you could only play as fairies, aka girls. But in 2010, that changed. Disney, a company pretty much known for playing things as safe as possible, felt the need to divert their resources into the creation of the Sparrow Man. At this point, I was 9 years old and uninvolved in online forums, so I can't say if there was an outcry for male avatars specifically from players, but I definitely think there has to have been some sort of active male player base for Disney to warrant the addition, especially considering there seems to be some controversy online from parents regarding the move. All that being said, I'm someone who weirdly finds myself gravitating towards playing as boys in games, so needless to say when the Sparrow Man came out, I immediately made one. And holy shit, did that change my enjoyment of the game. I can't tell you my fairy's name, but I can tell you my Sparrow Man's. Skylar Cloudy Weather. No longer was popularity in Pixie Hollow measured in exclusive items or outfits. Now, all you had to do was make a somewhat competent looking Sparrow Man and your DMs and friend requests were off the charts. Naturally, since I wasn't that popular, horse girl, I soaked the attention up. Skylar was a flirt. He had fairies and sparrowmen clamoring for a friend request or house invite. Over the course of our time together, Skylar had about 3 girlfriends, and it was actually an interaction with one of these girlfriends that leads me into my point. Skylar and this girlfriend were alone together in his house, on the bed, because I was just 10 and I didn't really understand the implications of that, but we were just chatting, having a good time, when all of a sudden she asks, "Do you want to have sex?" Looking back, sex was definitely just a way around the chat filter, but I'll be honest, at the time I had no idea what she was talking about. And I must have responded like the idiot I was, because she then clarified, "Do you want to make a baby?" At that point, I knew exactly what was happening, and I logged off so fast I broke through the sound barrier and found myself vibing in the Speed Force. So, I think that's probably a big reason why Star Stable doesn't want to add in boys. I don't know, to me that's a better argument than the alternative that Star Stable has presented to us, which implies they're all a bunch of sexist assholes who feel the need to exclude boys the way they feel girls have been excluded in the broader gaming industry because, you know, sexism is fine as long as it's misandry. Obviously, when you have any online space, especially ones geared towards kids, you're going to run into something like this. It's just the nature of the internet. So, obviously, excluding male avatars will protect kids from anything sexual, right? Actually, no. No, it won't.
Yo, Star Stable, Aspen Meadosa is out here asking to give somebody head.
I have searched high and low for the actual videos I had of people asking for adult role plays. I cannot find them, and I also cannot find, there was one thing I saw of someone saying, "I want Jeffrey to eat me." I can't find either of these instances. Just know in my monologue I was referencing it was a adult role play. They were looking for boys. I didn't intend on making this video ever at any point, so I didn't think to really keep a detailed record of the sexual conversations that I was seeing in Star Stable. So just keep that in mind. Adult roleplays are already happening in Star Stable. Male avatars be damned. There's no telling who a player is, how old they are, what gender they are. Though if I had to guess, I'd say in this case it's probably just a bunch of preteens who think it's funny. But you never know. A kid could very easily find themselves in a dangerous situation on Star Stable as things are now. So the argument that introducing male avatars would subject players to something inherently sexual is bullshit. Kids, it doesn't matter. If someone wants to find a way around the systems put in place to protect kids, they will, simply by using the word "six" instead of "sex." Really, the only solution if player protection is a major concern is to pull a YouTube and disable the chat system altogether. And we know how popular that's been on YouTube. To be honest, I understand why Star Stable doesn't want to address the issue. If they ignore it, it simply doesn't exist. And that seems to be a pattern with Star Stable, ignoring their player base in favor of bulldozing ahead with their agenda. Kinda similar to how Dark Core simply just does not give a shit about what anyone in Jorvik thinks because it affects their bottom line.
Eat a 2-week-old unrefrigerated pie. Dumb ways to die.
This is a side tangent, but listen. I understand it is not the social media team's responsibility to oversee or even address updates. But it is, however, important to recognize that they are often the first point of contact for the customer and therefore represent the face of the company. Videos like this are not just in bad taste, they're indicative of a larger problem within the company's attitude toward the consumer. If we decided to change this, implementing a male character option would be a huge project, and we would have to put a lot of our other work on ice. To me, this statement never really felt like enough. I mean, what exactly does a huge project constitute Star Stable? Especially considering they're already designing new character models, some of which look male passing. In all the research I've done, the biggest consumer of resources I've found is developing the character models and assets. If Star Stable's already doing this, then all that's left for the dev team is modifying the game's existing code to accommodate the new feature. This would include modifying the character creation interface, as well as updating quest dialogues to recognize someone's gender, similar to how the game already recognizes somebody's name and puts that into the storyline. On paper, this might sound like a lot, but in reality, it actually depends on a couple of things.
For the programmers out there, my experience has been with Agile. The idea with it is you have all of your backlog of tasks, which can be, bugs that you discovered like 2 years ago or have known about for ages, to feature requests, to restructuring, to doing all sorts of tech debt tasks that just need to get done. We did it on a 2-week cadence. We would go through the backlog of tasks and we would go through and just say, okay, is this something that can be done in like a day, or is this something that's going to take 2 weeks to do? We didn't do it as this, but you could almost think of it as just like a chart where you've got priority and difficulty, and then using both of those would figure out a rough plan of what the next 2 weeks of development looked like, what tasks we would actually tackle and commit to getting done, and how we would break it up so that we were roughly accomplishing the same amount of work every week, even though the tasks might be varying different sizes from sprint to sprint. Determining the next thing to do, there's a lot of stakeholders with that, and that's going to be true for any dev team, especially as you grow bigger in size. Like an indie team where it's like 10 people total, they're probably all going to have input on it. As you get bigger, you're going to have management. The team is going to have internally their own desires of what to do based on, sometimes, oh, we want to do this feature, or we know this feature is coming up. We are the only people that know that we need to do this thing before we can tackle that. So let's get to that now. It's hard to say exactly where male avatars would land on the difficulty scale without really knowing like what they have to work with. Based on what we've both looked at with Star Stable's team, it sounds like for certain parts of the game, there's kind of just a pool of devs working on things, or like they're balancing between multiple aspects of the game, and that can be tough as a programmer. We call it context switching. Think of it like in high school when you had a test in every class and you had to just go through every bell thinking like, okay, I need to be hyper focused on this and know everything that I'm doing. All right, and now an hour has passed, I need to go to the next class and do that with something completely different. Honestly, for me, it was always a big productivity breaker. Just because you're programming doesn't mean you can switch to working on something else and have it work instantly. Just because you're a filmmaker, you can't go back and forth between 3 different projects going on and instantly be productive on all of them. It's the same for anything, but I think people, because programming is such an enigma to a lot of people, they're just like, oh, it's all programming, it all worked, they push button and it go. Their point of being on an old engine definitely rings true. The example that I would give with that Rocket League is built on Unreal Engine 3. Since then, Unreal Engine 5 has come out. They announced like 2 years ago that they were working on porting Rocket League to Unreal Engine 5, and we still haven't even seen like a trailer of what that's gonna look like. So that's a big task to just upgrade your entire engine, and you're pretty much going to be devoting a whole team to it just to make sure that things feel the same when you go from old to new, so that's like a seamless transition for the players. I would be surprised if the engine itself is the issue with adding male or just any other avatars. I could see it very easily being the case of they never planned on it, so sometimes when you're programming, we say not to do it, but everyone will take shortcuts on things that they assume will always be true, and it takes a lot of work to basically decouple logic depending on how things are done. An example that I can think of in the general gaming space, kind of similar to this, would be Fallout 76, where it appears to be that when they released the game, they tied the physics to the frame rate. And then when it came to the PC version of the game, because they had this logic where a lot of the physics relied on the frame rate being 60 FPS, as soon as you uncapped the frame rate, the game physically, like physics ran at a different speed. I don't think anything to that extent would happen because, you know, tying physics to frame rate is a pretty extreme example. Male avatars is basically your models, your animation for the models, and the dialogue that goes with it. And maybe there's something with the character interface that would take a significant amount of rework to change as well, but based on them introducing new body types in the future, I kind of doubt that's the case, or at least it could use the same logic. It's hard to say for sure though.
I would imagine since they're adding in the new body types, they're going to have to redo the character interface anyways, because before it was only one body type. So you'll at least have to select through and go through different body types. I think they literally only have to make it to where it changes your pronouns, and you can go by he, him pronouns and use any of the body types or any of the hairstyles, literally anything.
I agree. I think that would be the easiest way to do it.
I think.
It's just you have body types and you have pronouns, and they're independent of each other. And updating pronouns would likely follow a, not the same, but similar path to how in any game dialogue prompts will have the character name inserted in there as like a dynamic bit. So, you know, you set your name to Poop. It says, "Hello, Poop." It would be like that, but it would just have to do a bit of simple logic based on, you know, okay, you set your pronouns to this. Let's make sure we say like he is, she is, they are, and get all of those right. If
they programmed their quest lines correctly, would they have to go in every single instance where that happens, like where they say she, and update the grammar?
Potentially, there might be ways that they could shortcut it, but in essence, yes, you would have to change every single appearance of that. You just might be able to do it faster than one by one. Open dialogue, highlight it, backspace, change it to be dynamic, save, go next.
Do you think it is too difficult for Star Stable to make male avatars?
Again, it's going to very much depend on what their existing code is. Maybe it is what we would call spaghetti code, and things are just like tied together in ways that it's going to take months to decouple logic and make work. But based on them already doing different body types for avatars, I would like to think, I guess, that it shouldn't be that big of a leap. I think on a social level, it is important to realize that, hey, this should be prioritized. And like you've said before, just because our lore says we're only for girls doesn't mean you can't also be inclusive.
So, the inclusion of male avatars depends on a few things. But what's the easiest solution here? If Star Stable really is that adamant about their lore, or they really can't pull the resources together for the addition, the easiest thing to do is to include significantly more male presenting assets with the new character update. And I mean significantly. I'm sure we haven't seen everything the team has to offer, but from what we have seen, I see maybe one masculine looking hair. Star Stable is definitely moving in the right direction in terms of having more diverse hairstyles and textures, but the last thing we need is another Sims 4 where like 90% of character cosmetics are for young females. And it's not just girly girls who are playing the game either. I mean, you have tomboys, non-binary folks, boys, but really the ideal solution is Star Stable reassess their priorities to include the creation of the male avatars. And hopefully when this happens, they'll make the steps to include more than just he, him pronouns, but they, them pronouns as well. While I know it's not a popular opinion to release updates unfinished, a middling solution, however, might be rolling updates out in waves. For example, they add boys into the game, but they don't go through and update the quest dialogues right away. While again, this isn't ideal, it could potentially help Star Stable better evenly distribute their resources. I'm sure if The Sims 4 still hasn't ironed out their sexuality and pronoun update, that You know, we can be more forgiving of a much smaller dev team with far less resources and far less money thrown at them. Ultimately though, Star Stable has to decide this is a worthwhile venture for them, and how things are now, I honestly don't know if we'll ever see boys in the game. I find it deeply disturbing that in 2023, an entire demographic of players are being excluded because of outdated gender stereotypes. It's my sincere hope that Star Stable will reconsider their approach and realize that horses aren't just a girl thing, but they're for everyone, regardless of their gender. Until then, it's up for us as consumers to demand change and support competitors who embrace the inclusive vision we wish to see. I just want to make an apology for everyone that my necklace was messed up the entire last half of the video. I know if you're like me, you were staring at it the whole time and wanted to die. Sorry for giving everybody sensory issues.